Hello human beings, PowerGamer here. In a world full of depression and horror, there are some things that will always be able to restore your faith in humanity. The miracle of childbirth, the beauty of nature, and of course, the joy of a talking cleaning utensil.
SpongeBob's SquarePants, one of the few pieces of media that can never truly end, no matter how much people might want it to. One of the most successful cartoons of all time, a show that has captured the hearts of children and adults everywhere for generations, even if people say it should have ended decades ago.
SpongeBob is genuinely my favorite TV show of all time. I've literally been watching it my entire life, and unlike most people, I don't think the series has ever gone fully bad. I honestly still love this show, so much so that I literally have the first 9 seasons on DVD. And of course, it can't be a popular media franchise from the 80s to the 2000s without getting at least one video game adaptation. There have been a lot of SpongeBob games over the years, with the most famous one being Battle for Bikini Bottom, which is a solid game, but I'm gonna save that for another time, because today we're gonna be talking about the SpongeBob game that I grew up playing, Atlantis Squarepantis for the DS.
Based on the quadruple-length TV special that everyone hates, but I honestly have a soft spot for, although I do agree it didn't need to be that long. Regardless, with it being the first 40-minute episode of the series, Nickelodeon decided to capitalize on it by releasing a tie-in game for the most profitable video game consoles at the time, i.e. the less powerful ones. There were actually 3 different versions of the game: the console version released on the Wii and PS2, the GBA version, and the one I'm going to be talking about today, the DS version. It was published by THQ, who at this point had the rights to most Nickelodeon properties, and this version was developed by Altron, a studio that seemed to specialize in making licensed handheld games. SpongeBob's Atlantis Squarepantis was released on October 23rd, 2007 in North America, with Europe and Australia getting it in February 2008, and Japan not getting it until June. What the hell took them so long? Although, weirdly, the DS, GBA, and PS2 versions all released on the same day, while the Wii version didn't come out until a month later, which is when the special actually aired. Can we get a show of hands for how many people were spoiled? Almost all versions of the game got fairly mixed reviews, but the DS version alone managed to sell over 1 million copies, so that's something, I guess.
I got this game for my birthday shortly after I got my DSi, and I remember enjoying it, though. It was never one of my all-time favorites, but since then I've become a bit more versed in SpongeBob games, and we literally just had a new one come out, so I think it's a good time for a stroll down memory lane.
The game roughly follows the plot of the episode. One day, SpongeBob and his best friend Patrick are sitting around blowing bubbles when SpongeBob blows one so big it fits both of them inside it. The bubble carries them off, and they panic, trying to escape, before they blow into a cave and are popped free by a strange object. They take it to the Bikini Bottom Museum, where they find Squidward, who reveals it's the missing half of the Atlantean amulet. And when both halves are joined together, the path to the lost city of Atlantis is opened. So they put the pieces together and set out for Atlantis alongside their friends Mr. Krabs and Sandy. SpongeBob and Patrick want to see the world's oldest living bubble, Squidward wants to see the Atlantean art, Sandy wants to check out their technology, and Mr. Krabs wants to get his hands on their treasure. However, unbeknownst to them, the nefarious Plankton stows away alongside them so he can get his hands on the lost weapons of Atlantis. Honestly, a pretty straightforward story, but it actually does take some creative liberties with it. I'll explain a bit more later, but because it's only based on one specific 40-minute episode, they added a handful of things to make the game last longer, which I can admire. Graphically speaking, the game looks pretty solid for a DS game. The models are a bit simple, but fairly clean for a handheld, and the environments have a nice amount of variety to them. The music is kinda generic, but it is at least pleasant to listen to. Although the presentation leaves a lot to be desired, the story is told entirely via still images on the top screen with dialogue on the bottom screen, and most of the images are ripped directly from the episode. I know the system was pretty limited, but I feel like they could have done a bit more than this. And don't even get me started on the weird noises the characters make when they get hurt.
But of course, licensed games of this era vary wildly in quality. You had some pretty solid ones, but most of them were just really generic platformers, and while this one is nothing mind-blowing, it is better than you might expect.
The game is actually a 3D platformer, which is something you didn't really see too often on the DS, and it honestly does it pretty well. The DS only had a D-pad instead of a joystick, so a lot of 3D games felt a little imprecise, but thankfully this game knew what it was capable of, and it honestly controls pretty well. Most of the levels require you to simply move forward while solving puzzles and dealing with enemies. As you go through, you collect these shells with notes on them called melody shells. However, much like the LEGO series, you control 2 characters at any given time and have to switch between them to get through the game. You start out with only SpongeBob and Patrick, but later on you unlock Mr. Krabs and Sandy as well. Each character has the same basic moveset. The B button lets you jump, the Y button is a basic attack, the X button is a charge attack, and the A button is a special ability. SpongeBob hits enemies with his bubble wand and can do the spin attack if you do the right combo, blows a giant bubble which can hurt and stun enemies, and inflates himself, allowing you to make larger jumps. Patrick does this chop attack, which can also spin, and it's much easier than SpongeBob's, does a powerful slam attack, and can push heavy things like blocks. Mr. Krabs hits with his claws, digs up melody shells, and can open treasure chests, and Sandy does super fast karate, supercharges herself which stuns enemies and makes her move faster, and chops to destroy boulders. But you can also use the trigger buttons to perform extra techniques. By holding the R button, you can pick up your partner to throw them, or push the L button to do a specific move at the cost of some melody shells, which is honestly the only real purpose these things serve. Which ability you use is determined by which character you're holding, not the one you're playing as. SpongeBob, again, is inflated, letting you reach higher areas. Patrick is thrown like a ninja star. Mr. Krabs becomes a crab mower, where he cuts grass with his claws, and I love how these are references to the actual episode, and Sandy is just thrown up in the air and then slams back down on enemies. Plus, each character has a different jumping power. SpongeBob and Sandy can double jump, while Patrick and Mr. Krabs can jump while carrying someone or something.
The partner system is fairly cool, and leads to some decent puzzles, but it's also one of the more annoying aspects of this game.
Like I said, you control 2 characters at a time, and when it comes to switching them, they pull a Donkey Kong 64 eye on us. You can only change characters at these weird shack things that show up sporadically throughout the levels. Now, thankfully, there's almost always one in a room where you need a specific character, so you won't be backtracking that much, but there are a couple of moments where you might not have the character you need to progress. But that's pretty minor. The real problem with the partner system is the AI is awful. If they even slightly snag on a platform, they'll just stop moving and won't continue following you, which wouldn't be as big of an issue if it wasn't for the fact that you need both characters in order to exit a room. So if they do get stuck, you have to switch to catch them up to you, meaning you have to go through these sections twice, and if there's a ladder, they just straight up will not climb it. It never happens. And that's not even getting into the moments where you want them to stay, but they actually do follow you. This part right here was the worst of it, since it's like it was deliberately doing it wrong just to piss me off. Aside from that stuff, this game is really easy. Most of the enemies go down in only a couple of hits, and the ones that don't aren't that much of a threat, since they don't do that much damage and can easily be ignored. Not to mention the game is extremely forgiving, since your health is restored in between rooms, dying just sends you back to the start of the room you're in, and falling into a pit is an instant death. It just takes away some of your health. Most of the level designs and puzzles are pretty simple, and the only slight extra stuff are the treasures, which are little things you can grab. Some are mandatory as you progress, but most are completely optional. And it wouldn't be a licensed kids game from the 2000s without some random mini-games thrown in. There's 6 of these that you have to do in the whole game, and they vary in quality. Some are actually kind of fun, others are just plain stupid.
The only other thing this game really has is the hub worlds in between levels, and they are extremely basic.
There's only 3 of these total, and even then, only one of them has anything interesting, and that's the first one, Bikini Bottom. If you go in SpongeBob's house, you can slightly alter the difficulty and look at your treasures. Squidward's house lets you look at the images you've gotten so far, and the Krusty Krab lets you replay the minigames, as well as play this other one called Melody Shell Free-for-All. You and 3 others throw stuff at each other to collect as many shells as possible, and whoever has the most when time runs out wins. It's a fine enough distraction. Aside from those, 2 of the areas let you talk to Sandy, who gives you a tutorial, which is actually kind of a fun area to mess around in, and all of them let you speak with Patrick to link with other players, allowing you to either play the game in co-op or play more free-for-all. After getting burst out of the bubble, they decide to find the missing pieces of the amulet. Yes, there is more than one piece to this half. This is a decent enough opening level in a cave where you have to collect 10 pieces of the amulet throughout the level, which thankfully aren't hard to find. But then the cave starts to collapse, and you have 4 minutes to run back through it. After that, they're chased by jellyfish spirits called jelly ghosts, which are after the amulet. This leads to our first minigame, Jelly Ghost Hunter, where you move forward in a boat and have to look around shooting jelly ghosts. Pretty uninteresting, honestly. After that, you have to make your way down the street while dealing with much stronger enemies, and by that I mean they just take more hits to kill. They then arrive at the museum where Squidward realizes what they have and explains it to them. They put the halves together, which summons this magic van, and Squidward decides he's not going with just SpongeBob and Patrick, so they go to find Mr. Krabs and Sandy. Mr. Krabs is oddly hesitant, as he's more concerned with losing his golden spatula. You then have to go back through one of the road sections and grab it. With him on board, they go get Sandy, who will only join them if SpongeBob can beat her in a karate match, which results in our first boss fight. Keep smacking her over and over again until you win. There is no strategy here whatsoever.
If only that worked back when I did karate. Ow.
Now that we've got the whole crew, they report to the van, but unbeknownst to them, Plankton is hiding inside. Anyways, this guide robot informs them that the van is powered by song, so they need to sing about what they want. Mr. Krabs then starts to go on about his money obsession, leading to another minigame, Magic Treasure Ride. He flies around on this magic dollar bill while you shoot money bags at him, Hans tries to block them, and you have to make sure you don't hit him with these batons. And this is where the game really changes from the special. Since Mr. Krabs was the only one singing, they weren't able to reach Atlantis. SpongeBob suggests Squidward play something on his clarinet, but he can't without sheet music, so they go to find some. They speak with this guy called the Pontifex, who says they're on the continent of an ancient civilization called the Mu. They apparently wrote music, and there's a copy of it in a temple, but they need 2 jewels to get inside. The red one is near a volcano, and the blue one is in the Coral Cave. You can actually pick which one you play first, and these levels are mostly designed with specific characters in mind. The Coral Cave is best with SpongeBob and Mr. Krabs and ends with a cool pirate ship, while the volcano is best with Patrick and Sandy and is just fighting a bunch of enemies, along with this really annoying part where you have to keep running back and forth with a block and a lever. After getting the jewels, they bring them back to Pontifex, while Plankton begins to cook something up. Now we can go here and place the jewels in the door to enter the temple. This room is suffering from advanced darkness, and you have to keep hitting these oil drums to light lanterns you randomly have in this room alone. Other than that, only thing of note is going in here. They got the sheet music, but can't read it since it's covered in ash, so we go back to the volcano and go further this time because at the top lies this flower which lets you remove it. But then the volcano starts to erupt, so we have another escape sequence. When you get back, though, we find Squidward running in fear because his clarinet was stolen by a giant jellyfish that Plankton made.
I thought Plankton was the bad guy. Why is he doing a good thing?
We go back to the entrance of the temple where the jellyfish zaps you and sends minions. All you do is grab these things and throw them at the jellyfish, get the clarinet back, and we can finally get a move on. The next minigame, Squidward Jams, is a rhythm game where you just tap the icon of the corresponding character while everyone dances. Despite being pretty simple and wildly inaccurate to Squidward's skills in the show, this is probably the best of the minigames. After that, they finally reach Atlantis via crashing into a wall, which we don't actually see. Gotta love those cheap production values. But yeah, we're now finally in the lost city of Atlantis, and it's kinda underwhelming. The first level is just a straight shot while avoiding these tanks that shoot snowballs and take ages to kill. But eventually you meet the Lord Royal Highness, or LRH, and can finally get what everyone was after. You then have 3 different rooms based on the 3 main songs from the special where you play a SpongeBob and the room's dedicated character. First is Mr. Krabs in the money room where you grab 15 pieces of treasure to put in this bag while enemies swarm you, then Sandy in the science room where you teleport through this virtual world to find a password for a computer, and then Patrick in the art room, yeah, not Squidward, where you ring these colored bells in the correct order. After that, we finally see the world's oldest living bubble and decide to take pictures with it. Crazy Bubble Paparazzi. You play as Patrick taking pictures of SpongeBob, and to fill up this meter, you have to match whatever pose he's doing on the bottom screen, as well as grab these things to take more photos. But all this picture taking causes the bubble to pop, which is a bit of a problem. They panic and tell LRH, but he reveals that that was just a prop for the tourists, and then shows them the real bubble. Patrick snaps a picture of this one too, which again pops it, causing LRH to fly into a violent rage.
I mean, that's kinda on you, buddy. If they destroyed your prop, why would you give them the real thing? They obviously can't be trusted.
Anyway, C6's guards on you, so Sandy fights them off in our last minigame, Atlantis Fighter EX. It's just a mindless button masher as you kill 30 of these guys. You can switch between an attack and defense mode, which doesn't really change much, and apparently you can do combos, but I couldn't actually get them to work. After that, we need to run back through the palace while fighting guards and avoiding booby traps. In the last room, you grab this thing and pop it in a laser cannon to open the door, but then they find the gate to the outside is locked, and this guy swallows the key. We then somehow get outside because they didn't want to make 2 separate boss arenas, and fight this guard who just swings around an anchor, and he's as thrilling and challenging as Sandy was at the beginning of the game. You get the key and escape, but outside you find Plankton got his hands on a giant tank, which he plans to use to take over the world. So yeah, he's the final boss, and it's honestly a decent fight. The tank is outfitted with a bunch of guns that each do different things. You want to wait until it rains cannonballs, grab the one that stays behind, and then load it into a cannon. Once it's hit, you have a short period of time to climb the tank and take out the cannons one by one. Doing so causes it to have less attacks. Once they're all gone, head straight to the top and hammer away. After that, Plankton unleashes his final attack, which just ends up shooting a bunch of ice cream on everybody. That is just as hilariously anticlimactic as it was in the episode. LRH decides to make Plankton the new display piece, and everyone heads back to Bikini Bottom while he's left imprisoned. That's the end of the game, though there is an actual reward for beating it. You can now finally play as Squidward. He slams his head down to attack enemies, plays his clarinet poorly, stretches his arms to grab companions, gets spun around when carried, and he can jump higher than everyone else. Kind of a nice bonus, but I'm done with the game at this point, so, nah.
Squarepantis is a charming enough little time. It's no masterpiece, but as far as licensed games go, it's pretty solid. If you're a massive SpongeBob fan, I can see you having a decent time with it, but it's certainly not a must-play. I'm sure it's one of the better SpongeBob games out there, but I can't really say for certain. There's way too many of them, and I do not have time to play them all. It's usually not the best idea to consume every single piece of media that's based on a source material that you really like. I mean, if you want proof, just look at how many things we have based on the Bible. Yikes.